Some people might think that swimming is a sport, but in reality, it is both an activity and a sport. Swimming involves physical exertion, which makes it a sport according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of sport: physical activity engaged in for pleasure. However, swimming requires extensive training, thus, it qualifies as both an activity and a skill. It's possible for something that is both an activity and a skill to be considered both a sport and an art form. Some examples are painting or singing opera. Swimming has evolved into many different types of sports such as water polo, synchronized swimming, diving, marathon swimming, also called open water swimming, surf lifesaving, competitive swimming, and underwater diving. These sports have different rules and vary in how much one is required to exert oneself physically exertion-wise. Instead of just considering swimming a sport because it requires physical activity and training, it can also be considered as an art form due to the many forms it has taken on throughout history. Is swimming a hard sport? There are lots of different types of hard. Swimming can be psychologically hard because you have to push yourself through discomfort for prolonged periods. It can also be physiologically hard because the act of doing it involves your body producing stress hormones and other chemicals which make you tired afterward. Some people might say that if they had to swim, they'd probably die because they're not very good at it yet. That last kind of hard doesn't necessarily have to involve anyone being unkind, but some swimmers do like to push each other. These 4 definitions of hard are all valid and worth talking about in swimming circles, but they're quite different from each other. If you find yourself thinking, "Oh my gosh, swimming is so hard," how can you tell which definition you have in mind? You could ask yourself whether it's psychologically or physically difficult for you right now. Or perhaps if it feels very competitive, as though there isn't much margin for error or accidents, even when the swimmers around you aren't being aggressive. Or maybe this kind of hard is just what happens to everyone who tries to swim longer distances, as long as the difficult bits are finished by then. For some people, at some times by certain definitions. But the points above mean that it doesn't have to be a hard sport all the time. Is swimming a water sport? Swimming is one of many water sports. It includes carrying out different kinds of activities related to movement in a swimming pool or open water, usually using the human body mainly for propulsion. Although it can be recreational, competitive swimming is an Olympic sport that is part of the Summer Olympics. Even if not, everybody knows that it's considered a sport. I guess we all agree on saying swimmers are athletes, but what about swimmers? Are they athletes too? Yes. Swimmers are professional athletes and should not be confused with non-professional swim enthusiasts. That's what we call them. Swimmers may just be hobbyists who love the feeling you get when you glide through calm waters like dolphins or sharks do, but they still must have good cardiovascular fitness and strength to keep both their body and mind in top shape. Is swimming a team sport? On the one hand, it is difficult to argue that swimming is not a team sport when you consider that it often takes up to 12 swimmers and multiple coaches just to make sure everyone gets enough attention. But on the other hand, if only one person swims at a time in a 50 meters race, does it really count as a team sport? It depends on who you ask. If you ask your average Australian sports fan or athlete, then there's no doubt, they'll dismiss swimming very quickly. They all just get into individual lanes and swim for themselves. But this definition of team sport doesn't take into account the work that goes on behind the scenes by each athlete's coach and support staff. If you take all that into consideration, then it's easy to argue that swimming is a team sport. Most of the people who played or are still playing rugby league would agree with you. Having swum on multiple Olympic relay teams is no doubt why their definition of team sport goes somewhat beyond what happens on the field or court.